Hello, everyone. We're here at the 26th Annual H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival. I'm Brian Callahan, one of the directors of the fest, and we're here with Kevin Pontuti. Is that how you say your name? Pontuti?
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
The director and co-writer of the Yellow Wallpaper. Welcome, Kevin.
So glad to be here. Thank you so much for having us, or having me, having us in the festival.
It's such a wonderful film. You know, H.P. Lovecraft actually singled out Charlotte Perkins Gilman as being one of his inspirations. He said that he had a quote along the lines of, you know, that the story subtly delineates or the madness of a woman or the escalating madness of a woman trapped in a room with horrible wallpaper, essentially. So he really liked it. He listed Charlotte Perkins Gilman among his favorite New England authors, along with Nathaniel Hawthorne and a few others, which is interesting because the Yellow Wallpaper is not on its face necessarily a supernatural story. But it is one of sort of the three main kind of literary horror, if you will, stories that so expertly showcases an unreliable narrator, the other two being the Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson and Turn of the Screw by Henry James. I think between that and the Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman set up a scenario where we as the reader can't really know the objective reality of the story. Consequently, it can be very, very challenging to put on film. How did you initially tackle the idea? Now, you filled out the story a lot. There's a lot more happening in the film than ever really happens in the comparatively short story. Number one, how did you tackle just doing it to begin with, knowing, you know, with this idea that we're getting it all from her point of view and that maybe we can't really know what's happening for real? And then how did you decide to sort of expand on the story? What was the genesis of that?
Yeah, I think when we first started looking at the story, you know, there was a moment when Lex and I were talking, or Alexandra and I were talking, and, you know, I think she initially thought that, you know, we might do it as a short film. And, you know, we were driving, having this conversation, and I'm like, no, I think we can make a feature out of this. And it's like, well, how? It's, you know, it's a short story. I said, well, you know, there's so much, since it's coming from, you know, it's all written like in a diary, basically. And so, you know, Gilman would summarize, or the writer, the character, the woman would summarize, like, this weekend, so and so would come to visit, and, well, that could have been like, how do we show the weekend, right? It could be one scene, it could be 4 scenes, it could be all of these things. And so once we realized that we had the possibility of expanding it, and taking these moments that are summarized and flush them out, that gave us a lot of opportunity. We also, you know, early on, I think, said, you know, we want to, you know, stay true to the themes and the overall narrative of the short, because we felt like that, you know, we wanted that and our audiences would want that. We also wanted to kind of give them some unexpected things and not just do, you know, a real literal translation. So, or adaptation. So, you know, we work with, I have a couple of colleagues here at University of Pacific that teach adaptation writing, and and so we put all our heads together and really kind of thought about like, okay, so where might we go with this? Yeah, so that was kind of the and since you have an unreliable narrator, then it becomes this whole other layer of, well, what do we do with that? And so I think we kind of had some fun with that creatively. It's not really a fun story, but it was something that, coming from a background in art and painting, and I come out of a visual arts background, so I was immediately able to start really visualizing things that would be really creatively interesting. So yeah.
Now we've seen this in the theater with two separate audiences.
Mm,
So we played it out in Providence at our smaller satellite festival, and then we played it last weekend here in Portland. And something that struck me both times, that I didn't necessarily have this reaction the first time I saw it, but maybe you've experienced it as well. You mentioned that it's not a fun film, but that there's that sequence right at the beginning where he says to her, I wish you would do something about that crying baby, and she tosses it out the window and then looks relieved. Um, has gotten a laugh each time we've seen it,
mm,
which is interesting, and I think maybe it's a nervous laugh and not a ha 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 how funny she threw out the baby, but but I think there are people in the audience can sort of, I maybe after 18 months of COVID, can sympathize with the desire to throw their kids out the carriage window. Um, but I think it's also a really interesting way to kind of enter a story, which does get kind of progressively darker as you go through,
mm.
and maybe sets up this idea that maybe what you're seeing on screen isn't representative of what's actually happening. How did you? And now that's a moment that comes very early on in
Right.
the film.
Yeah.
Was that what you were trying to do with that?
Yeah, I think so in putting this together, Alexandra, really kind of came up with that idea of like, okay, what if she throws the baby out the window at the beginning? And I was like, just it's brilliant. And but then we had to figure out actually how to do it, right? Then it's like there's the like, how do you do that with a bit, so from a production standpoint, but I think that one of the interesting conversations we had, even as we kind of test screenings with with cast and crew, and with our group, was do we show right away that it was like she was imagining it, and we didn't do that. We basically, we just moved into the next scene after the title, and we didn't kind of, we could have shown a like, oh, like she's sitting there still with the baby and the baby's still
Right.
crying. Um, but that wouldn't have set up that idea of, are we believing what we're seeing, or, seeing what's happening. And, you know, we felt like it brought the audience much more into Jane's world, and into her head. And that was something that, from the beginning, we really wanted this really super subjective experience. And so that was a way, I think, to, that decision not to, and even when we were writing it, I think somebody had said like, well, in the script, are they going to think that they really threw the baby out? And I'm like, let them think that, let's play with that. So it was in the end, it was a pretty easy decision for us, but you totally picked up on it in terms of, the functionality of it as a way to kind of like have people start questioning, the things they're seeing.
There's a having it. So you mentioned that you could have shown that, well, maybe the baby didn't get thrown out the window and she's still got it. It's sort of a clap back to a scene where she's still holding it. I really do like the way, I think it creates a lot of suspense there.
Mhm.
To sort of wait, because I think you wait and then there's the title,
Yeah.
and then you wait and all the way until the carriage pulls up and they get out to see that maybe she didn't throw the baby out the window. There's also, now the point of a Q&A like this is not to suss out the secret story. It's not to get at what you think happened necessarily. you're more than welcome to tell us what you think happened. But I think, by the time we get to the end of the movie, a lot of, we were thinking, a lot of people were asking, like, was there a baby to throw out?
Mm,
Um, was there, the wet nurse may or may not have been there, it seems.
mhm,
Very often the yellow wallpaper is talked about as a commentary on postpartum depression. Um, but there's certainly things about your film that make us think, maybe the difficulty is not that she had a child, but that she didn't have a child, and that's what they're dealing with here. Um, but I really like the way that it keeps you guessing throughout, as you start to realize that the two nurses that are there are not really on equal footing. You know,
mhm, mhm.
from a character perspective, how did you write that? At times I felt like the wet nurse was maybe a component of um, her psyche. Sort of talking to her, and there's that wonderful sequence where they're lying in bed, speaking to each other. Is that how you approached that?
Yeah, I think when we were talking a lot about that, those both of those characters, there was a, in the story, I mean, the one Jenny is pretty written in and pretty kind of clear that she's, John's sister, and at least I think it is. Maybe I'm just remembering it now. But it's pretty, there's a solidity there, that's, we felt really solid with the other the other nurse, or maid, Mary, that we call it, it's that became something where we took a lot of liberties, and we really did want to kind of, like, we wanted her to start off feeling real, and then as the film progressed, became less real potentially, and kind of, and really, we didn't want to answer it either way. It's, to me, that's the magic of movie making, and it is when I, at least for me, when I get in there and get kind of like all these questions and these interpretations, and like to me, that's kind of what it's about. So I was really, like, we really went to painstaking lengths to not answer some of those things, and hopefully people enjoy that.
um, Now, hopefully, now everybody watching this Q&A should have seen the film, right? So because we're verging heavily into spoiler territory here, although
Hmm.
classic literature and all, right? Um, but there is a post-credit sequence right at the end of the film, kind of a cheeky little, like, that maybe makes us ask, like, did what we experienced before the credits actually happen? Did the events of the film end the way we thought so? And we also, there towards the end, have the sort of the double vision of seeing her suspended, as well as the woman from the wallpaper crawling around the edge of the room,
Hmm.
which is one of my favorite moments in the film, because it really kind of casts this so much of the story in doubt.
Hmm.
Is there a woman in the wallpaper? Did she commit suicide? Is she crawling around the floor and she just imagines she committed suicide, because as a way to escape from a life that she doesn't seem to be enjoying all that much? It creates a lot of, right there in those last couple minutes of the film. It creates a who knows moment, that I think is really beautifully done.
Thank you. I really appreciate hearing that. That was, we the ending stayed pretty close to what we had written. We had definitely, we knew really early on that we were going to end in the way we did. Maybe not so much with the extra scene with, that's after the credits. That was something that was kind of found in the editing process, and was something that, and we had, once we started incorporating that extra kind of, that moment, we started playing around with where we might put it. Was it after the credits? Was it before the credits? And so it took us a little bit to kind of figure that out and decide if we really wanted that extra bit. But I think you hit it right on, because it is something that really adds that one more layer of, because we didn't want to, again, we wanted to do something a little unexpected with the ending, and but still stayed true enough, potentially, right? And there's so much subtext in Gilman's writing about, the way she's describing the flowers and the way they're configured, and the pattern, and the broken necks and the bulbous eyes. And so we did a lot of talking to, like, quite a few literary experts that teach this, that really were able to, kind of, hone in on the story. And then we talk, a lot of people, that have depression, and are, and all these kind of anxiety, and, so we did a lot of research, and I think out of that came this, these other possibilities that I felt like if we would have done a straight, again, straight kind of, adaptation, like, we wouldn't ever be able to do the text justice, and because there's so much subtlety, and symbolism and subtext that, we really wanted to find ways to kind of honor that, and do something kind of smart and fun with it.
Makes sense. Um, One thing I want to mention, just talking about Gilman and Gilman's text, just to give people in the audience who may not know this an idea that many of the things you've read in Lovecraft's literature, when he does these name drops, he often is name dropping things based on authors that he enjoys. And of course, we all know the Gilman House Hotel from Shadow over Innsmouth, as well as oh gosh, because I'm on the spot, I can't remember. There's a Walter Gilman from Dreams in the Witch House.
Mm.
And we've asked around a little bit, various Lovecraftian scholars, and most of them kind of go, maybe, some people think he's making a pun on Gill Man, like a man with gills. But it seems more likely that what he's doing is actually tipping his hat to Charlotte Gilman, which, if you look at the picture of two of them side by side, they could be brother and sister. It's a little strange.
That's true. I never thought of that. That's pretty. Yeah, I could see that.
Now, people, those of us in the Lovecraftian cinema community are pretty used to seeing, Lovecraft often wrote short stories, almost exclusively wrote short stories. But almost all of those short stories have been adapted to feature-length films, like Stuart Gordon's great From Beyond and Reanimator. So none of our audience is shocked by the idea that you could take a relatively short story and expand it to create, much more fully fleshed characters and story ideas. But what were some of the things? What were some of the things when you were fleshing this out that was really important? And maybe some of the things that Lexi felt was really important to get forward in her character.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the I'm going to hit this in two parts. I think, one of the things that I think was the most challenging early on in the development was how we were going to handle the wallpaper. Right. So, given there's so many, like, one point, are we doing a CG? Is it like, are we going to show a woman moving through patterns? Like, there's so many possibilities around that. And I think that was probably the hardest part, to kind of figure out. And once we kind of landed on, I think it was like one night, I kind of, woke up in the middle of the night, and there's so much about the gardens and and I just kind of realized that, like, well, this idea that she's escaping into the gardens, and the gardens kind of merge with the wallpaper. And there's a lot of scenes where that kind of happens through dissolves, or just, cuts to, parallel editing. We found all different kind of ways that we could do that. But once we kind of solidified the fact that the gardens were almost the inside of the wallpaper, and that we could move her through those spaces. That was something that, like, then we had a clear direction of where that was going. So that was like a big, kind of a big important step of the development there. In terms of character, I think that one of the things that Lexi will talk a lot about, and I think I can speak for her in this, is that she was not only co-writer, lead, but also co-producer. And so when we're doing all this in Ireland, she's trying to wear her producer hat, trying to wear her writer hat, but then also I'm trying to like protect her, to focus on, to give her the space with the acting. And she often kind of tells the story where, because of the level of stress and around everything that was going on, it got her pretty easy to get into this kind of headspace that, some of it was just real. It's like, that just like, but I do think, she's so good and just so subtle with her, persona, and with this character. In person, I wish if you saw her, she's like super animated and happy, and I mean, obviously a complete, full person of of emotions. And but this was like really something where she was able to kind of control in a great way, and then really expand on and get pretty aggressive. And it was just a great, the way she just handled that arc from a woman who was trying to hold it together in the beginning and do what she's kind of supposed to do, and to see that her release that throughout the film was really exciting to watch. And while we were filming, it was incredible and magical. And I just, super appreciative that that she does what she does.
Her performance was stunningly wonderful. I think, and so stories like this work, because whether we are people that suffer from, what we might consider clinical depression or not, we can all relate to, these
Mhm.
feelings, And I think watching that, watching her performance kind of tease out the nuances,
Mhm.
is really great. I like what you said about moving through the wallpaper. I actually, that's a nuance that hadn't really landed on me. That there are those moments where she's in the garden looking at herself in the room, and vice versa. And I hadn't, I guess, put my finger on the wallpaper itself, kind of being like the garden, the conduit for
Mhm.
that.
There's a couple really subtle things that love my sound designer. Oh my god, and my composer. Just oof. But there's a couple moments in the film where Ed Jacober, who's did the sound design, and all the foley and the ambient kind of the sounds of the pipes and the but there's a couple of moments where we're inside, but we're hearing the outside in some scenes. I mean, this is super subtle, probably maybe a lot of people don't even pick up on it, but then there's some scenes where she's outside, but you're hearing the things that are inside the house. And that was, I just like, oh my God, like, I love you. This is brilliant, but it was that sort of thing of like kind of, merging these is she inside? Is she outside? Is she imagining that she's outside? I think there's a lot of that I think that really opens up the possibility of kind of interpreting, she does she ever leave the room, right? Yeah.
So one of the things that over the years has become apparent to us more and more is you think of a film as being a visual medium, and a performance oriented,
Hmm.
plot oriented, but we often don't give as much thought to sound design as viewers as we should. It's really that part of the film that kind of operates on our brains almost the most.
Hmm.
Any film that we find scary or particularly effective or emotional seems like we can always kind of point back to the sound design for those cues about how the films make us feel about them.
Yeah, I didn't, the sound, I think, I do think there's also a lot of subtle formal stuff that we did with the camera and the lighting and, our DP, Sonia Tippin, just amazing, and working with her was incredible. She also comes from a painting background. Like she did her undergraduate studies in painting, and then was at AFI for cinematography. And we connected like super early on when I was interviewing DPs, and we just had this shorthand as we were talking about painting and talking about color, and just incredible. And so I think there's obviously things she's doing with the camera that is also sometimes not even noticeable in a way, and is obviously affects, like the sound would, right? Yeah.
One of the other elements that we haven't really talked about yet that sort of helps really put us in a place is the wonderful costume design. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So again, being a University of the Pacific, we have a whole, theater department of people, and Kathy McClellan, who teaches here and is unfortunately, well, fortunately for her, unfortunately for me, she's retiring this year. But she's a costume designer and art director, and so I started working with her pretty early on kind of imagining the costumes and and what both from a research standpoint, but then also how it would work in the narrative kind of flow. So there's examples where, I mean, obviously, we knew we wanted to be in this period. We weren't setting it. We filmed it in Ireland, but it wasn't set in Ireland. It was this kind of mysterious place, right? But her work in terms of finding colors and this design document that she put together. I'll have to show it to you at some point, but it's just amazing. It's like all these, both drawings, but then how she dresses herself as the film progresses. In the beginning, she's very prim and organized and taking painstaking. Her hair's just all done up. And then throughout the film, all of that starts to like she's wearing her top but not her bottom, and it's mismatched, and her hair's so all of that was stuff that Kathy really we worked on, but Kathy was just amazing at kind of helping us see through that. She also kind of made the main kind of nightgown. So we went to Ireland basically with I think it was 3 nightgowns, a couple of shawls, and then everything else we kind of sourced there through our Irish producers, Emerald Giant, who, but they were all working off of her document. So, and they were kind of tracking, and even with, we're talking about Mary, Mary, the one, kind of nurse that we're not sure is there or not. There was moments where, depending on what she was wearing, and it's a subtle difference, but in some cases it was, we actually were deciding between like, was it the Mary that is there versus the Mary that might not be there? And so we had slightly different costumes for that. And, but those were all discussions. Like we were like, it's like, they're asking me is she's about to come on set. Like, is this, the real Mary or is this the not real Mary? And I'd be like, it's the not real Mary. Anyway. But the costumes were amazing, and and so were the locations, and we're just really grateful that we were able to do all that.
Yeah, talk a little bit about the main location, the main house.
Mhm.
Was that filmed all on location inside the house?
Yeah, so that was a that was an old convent that was sourced by Emerald Giant Productions. I gotta give them the credit for that. But it was an old convent that we were able to build out the the room in there, and so and we had multiple rooms that we used for different things, and so we were able to do 90% of the production on the grounds there, and and so that was really a find. And Sylvia Moore and Zeb Moore and Rob Gill, like all like they found that, and you know, and so they you know, they've got all the locations figured. If anybody wants to film in Ireland, talk to them.
I would very much like to film in Ireland. Yes.
Yeah.
um, what about things like the carriage and all of that? Like, was that all historic equipment and furniture and all of that they used, or were those reproductions?
I think, I mean, the carriage, you know, it was one of those things where, you know, you know, they sourced the carriage and I was happy that it got there. Right. Like, I mean, you know, I was like, yep, looks good. You know, whether it was accurate or not, I don't, I mean, but I think that's the thing, is that we weren't looking for accuracy necessarily. We were looking for feeling. And so, but yeah, like the furniture, I think was all pretty, you know, close to the right time period. You know, I mean, we did the wallpaper ourselves. That was something we designed with our production designer here. And, you know, Peter Galante, the art director, like, you know, he and I went round and round and round on these wallpaper designs, like, you know, hundreds of designs. And we finally landed on one that was like a hybrid of a few different designs where you incorporated some things into it, and then he printed it all, brought it to Ireland, they installed it in the whole room. And the key, I mean, we were initially planning on filming here at University of the Pacific, on our stage, and building, you know, basically building a set for the room. And because we're like, nobody's going to let us come into a house, throw up all this wallpaper, tear it off, have some crazy woman spinning around, like jumping off the seat, you know, like, so we were convinced that we were going to use a set. And, but once I was kind of like trying to, you know, we were then, you know, as we were, I was like, okay, we can build a set here. And then we decided we wanted the exterior, some of the exterior locations. You know, we found this exterior of a house in Ireland that we really liked. And I was really struggling to find a house here that really worked for what I was looking for. But we were over at a festival and over in Ireland, and I'm like, God, that would be like the perfect house, you know? And so, you know, I kind of forgot about it. And then like 6 months later, I was like, maybe we should use that exterior. We'll go shoot some exteriors, and we'll come back and build the room. But then it was like, we got to fly all the actors over. And then we're like, well, what are we, you know, so then it became like, let's do as much of it in Ireland as we can. And so that just moved that whole kind of train kind of forward that way. I mean, we could have done it here, you know, I mean, there's, you know, we, obviously we, you know, it was just been different, you know, but I'm really glad we did it there.
Yeah. It looks, it all looks great. I mean, from the environment, the exterior environment, the gardens, as well as the inside of the house. And I think that it does feel like you're centered in one location, which is something you don't always feel if you're shooting like that. If you're shooting, you know, in a set and at a location.
Mm-hmm.
It was all in that location, like on the grounds of that one house.
No, I mean, there was a lot of it, but there was, well, so the exterior of the house, obviously is not the interior of the house. That was like, but it was within a block, you know, it's like, it was right, it was just down the road. So, you know, so we could walk there. But then a lot of the gardens though were 30 miles away. You know, some of the gardens were right there, a few of them, but a lot of the gardens in the greenhouse were 30 miles away. So we had, you know, when I started doing, you know, as you know, Peter had gone over and done location scouting with Emerald Giant, and they were sending me photos back of like houses, gardens, like, you know, the things I'd asked for. And as I was getting those things, I drew a big, I like to draw a lot. I drew like an overhead diagram, kind of a map basically of like, okay, this is the house. Behind the house are the gardens. Over here are the woods, you know, and it has nothing to do with what they, you know, it's just more like, so I can understand it conceptually of what we're going to piece together with all these parts, because it was obvious there was going to be like, okay, this room was going to be that room. So that map was something then that I sent over and said, okay, this is how it's all going to seam together basically through the shooting and the edit. And so when somebody goes around the house this way, when she walks out the front door, hangs a left, goes back around, like that brings her here, and she's got to come in this way. And so, I mean, that's typical kind of directing, figuring it out kind of stuff. But I mean, it was great. I mean, it was a puzzle, right? And then the lighting matching, right? And so, it's like, I remember our first AD going like, well, the lighting's totally wrong. Like it's the wrong time of day. Like I'm like, nobody's going to notice. Like it. And here's the thing, we're already setting up that this is like, a magical realist space almost, or this thing that's happening. And it was like, yeah, I mean, in some cases it would matter, but in most cases, like in some of these cases and the ones that were, because we were always running out of time with everything, it's indie filmmaking. And so there was a lot of times we're like, okay, well, this is what we got. We'll make it work. And I think we did.
I think so. Yeah. No, we've been talking for a good while, so we probably should wrap up. One thing Gwen is better about doing than I is watching for questions in the Discord server. Have there been any? Okay. People may still be watching the movie. We give them a lot to watch. And so the number one complaint is that there's just not enough time to watch everything. We gave everyone 2 extra days, though, this time, so they'll hopefully get around. But the good news is, the Q&A will be here for them to watch when they have finished the film. If they're watching Eventum in their browser, they'll come straight into this Q&A. We've talked about a lot. We talked about the wallpaper itself, which was one of the questions I was going to ask you. I can tell that you've done a few Q&As because you're maybe here and there just a little ahead of the questions I'm going to ask.
Sorry.
He was like, oh, now is about the time when he'll ask about the wallpaper, which I think is wonderful. It was a horrible wallpaper, horrible to behold, well designed. Did you do anything digital with the tone or the color or anything, or was that was how it was designed and that's how we saw it?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I come from like a colorist. I actually used to work as a colorist for a while back in the day. And so I did all the color myself. And we, there was the only thing that we really did with the wallpaper color wise, well, there's 2 things I'll say. One was, there's places where because of the lighting, it got shifted, one way or another. But early on, my DP and we talked a lot about, it's like, look, we're going to be in this room for 90% of, or 70% of the movie. We need it to look different throughout. Like it can't just be the same lighting. And, so we worked and talked about like what parts of the film would be maybe bluer or greener, and some of that was lighting control. The thing that, I kind of did is I kind of made sure it kind of got a little bit more sickly and dingy as the, towards the last like 20 minutes of the film. So there's this progression where, it's like, it gets kind of, and it starts to kind of tie in with the music, where the music starts changing and getting even, like more intense and more unexpected. And with that shift, there is it starts getting a little greener and sickly as that progression kind of happens. And, but I mean, that was all really pretty minor stuff, it wasn't like, there wasn't a lot of, not a ton of post, in terms of, there's definitely some things we did, but there wasn't like a ton of, we had to like fix some, telephone poles we had to take out and things that would kind of throw off the periodness. But otherwise it was pretty straight, like, yeah, a lot just balancing and mixing, but not a whole lot of heavy-handed stuff.
Oh, interesting. I'm reminded a little bit, although perhaps this film reminds me of the original Yellow Wallpaper. There was a film of maybe 2 or 3 years ago called His House.
Mm.
A wonderful, wonderful horror film that is sort of also tracks the progress of somebody who's just moved into an environment they don't really want to be in. And there is a sort of a similar sort of wallpaper destruction sequences in that. And I very much thought when I saw that of the Yellow Wallpaper. I was reminded of, again, it's a wonderful film. I forget who the director is, but I think you can find it on Shudder and other places. But
Okay.
also a wonderfully constructed film. But it's more of a conventional horror film. There seem to
Mm.
be actual ghosts or spirits in it as well. Um, well, gosh, one thing that we like to ask sometimes is if any happy accidents ended up on screen. Were there times
Mm.
where the things you put into the film that you didn't really plan that just happened? You thought, oh my God, that's wonderful. Let's use that.
Yes. I mean, yes. And I think one of my favorite sequences was kind of, on the fly. There's the moment where it's towards the end of the film. She's kind of crawling through the gardens along the bushes. And as she's crawling, you start seeing these pieces of wallpaper in the bushes, and so she's kind of crawling around there. And it's really when she starts really kind of like merging, with, and then she's also crawling and peeling the wallpaper at the time. And so she's kind of like, I mean, the idea to put the strips of the wallpaper in the bushes was something that I just did on the fly. I was like, oh my God, this is like, I was just like, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. Like, and people are like, I'm like, get out here. I need everybody tearing up wallpaper and putting it in the bushes, and so that was really like one of those like moments of just, like pure inspiration. And it, I think it really made, I don't know, it's I think one of the most interesting and poetic scenes. I mean, for me in the film is and even as then that sort of like the editing process of cutting back and forth between that and then, the way the camera's kind of moving through, we were able to kind of continue the movement from her crawling and almost make her POV is matching with the camera that Sonia was doing. And all that was kind of found in the editing room, that, that kind of tying it together. And I'd say between that and the other thing I think was really fun was when we were, we had to kind of peel the wallpaper off. We couldn't have Lexi just do all that herself. So we had we'd shoot a bit and then we'd peel and then we'd shoot a bit, because it all kind of had to happen. Like that whole section had to be shot in sequence because we couldn't go back and put the wallpaper back up. And, but as we were doing it, like I got to go in and kind of like draw things in the peeling. And so like you can see there's really kind of some shapes that are really weird and like almost figurative. And that was really something that I wasn't, really planning on doing, but I'm like, oh my God, let's the painter in me kind of came out and started like, drawing into the patterns and stuff with the peeling. So that was something again that I think, yeah, just, kind of happened on the fly.
Now you've mentioned a couple times that you're an artist as well. Is there anything at hand right there that you could show us that you've done?
God, not in here right now. I mean, this photograph over here is a friend of mine, Charlie White, who's a really great artist. And I used to do all his kind of post-production work, and we worked together on just, tons and tons of projects. So that's his photograph there. It's something that's really meaningful. But yeah, this is, these are, I don't really have anything on hand, but I'll send you some stuff.
Yeah, that'd be swell. So I guess it's about time to wrap this up, I think, and let you go. I mean, I can talk for hours and hours and hours. That's no problem for me. Well, during the festival, maybe it's a little bit of a problem, but but I can do it like that. No problem.
Yeah. Well, I would like to say, to your audience, like if there's, if you did enjoy the film, please, feel free to reach out. We're definitely, happy to answer other kind of questions or have conversations. We're just so, feel just so blessed to be part of this. And thank you, Brian and Gwen. And if you do like the film, we'd love to, go on to IMDb, give us some stars, or Rotten Tomatoes. With all that kind of helps. If you didn't like the film, maybe don't do that. But that all that kind of adds up. And our website, we're definitely keeping updated with a lot of other festivals and information, and our distributor Mutiny Pictures will be putting the film out like at the beginning of the year. So hopefully we'll get to see. I've only seen it once in a theater, and it wasn't even a real theater. So I'm dying to get into, I've only seen it with an audience once, and I'm just, but anyway, that's the world we're in right now.
I wish you could have been here for our screening, because we show everything. That's the Hollywood Theater here was built in 1926. It's been fully restored over the course of the last decade or so. And it's just beautiful. It's got a 60-foot curved Cinerama screen, the kind they used to drive with 3 projectors.
Wow.
So when you're sitting in front of it, it's just this massive, almost encircles you. Yeah. And it's beautiful. The sound is wonderful there. It's the best theater in the world for the best audience in the world, I think.
Yep.
Pandering a little.
That's thank you for doing that, and thank your audience for me, or thank you if you're watching. And this film means a lot to us, and I think so many people, and we're really glad that people are getting to see it. So appreciate it.
Now, where you mentioned your website, where can we find you? Mention all your website address.
Yep.
You have a newsletter I've been getting lately as well.
Yep. So www.yellowwallpaperfilm.com. So and then there's a thing where you can kind of sign up. Sign up there. We're on Instagram. ywp.com, something like that. You can find it, comes up pretty quick in the search. Yeah.
Awesome. And is there a place where we can see your artistic works, or is that just a private message kind of thing?
It's more, this is kind of my artistic work for the last, I don't really have anything, it's for the last 15 years, this has been my thing. So, but the sensibility, I think, and my interests and my teaching and all of that, I definitely lean on that all the time. And, at some point I always tell people that, when I'm too old to make movies or whatever, I'm gonna do graphic novels. I love drawing, and I do a lot of storyboarding, and I'm out of practice now, but like at some point when I'm like senile, or stick me in a room with like a bunch of paper, and I'll probably be okay.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's as good as any place, I think, to wrap it up. Was there anybody you want to shout out before we go?
I think I got pretty much everybody on my list there. Mom and Dad, if you ever see this, no, I'm just kidding. They might, but thank you. Yeah, thanks again for the opportunity, and just really, this has been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna have Gwen take us out. Are you ready? All right, let's give him a wave. Bye, everyone.
Cheers.